Good morning. It's very cold outside, and many of you may not make it to church this morning. In your absence, I want to give you a quick overview of what we'll be looking at. It's an exciting day at First Presbyterian Church of Decatur. So if you're not with us, let me share very briefly what we'll be looking at as far as homily and scripture reading. The scripture comes from Luke chapter 2, verse 21 through 35. It's a very interesting passage right after Christmas. And it's a time when they take Jesus, the family takes Jesus to the temple for his circumcision and also the purification of the mother, which was common in that day and prescribed by the Mosaic law. I want to point one significant thing out in the very beginning, verse 21. On the 8th day, as it passed, it was time to circumcise the child. Now, circumcision was prescribed twice in the Mosaic law. It was a claim that God puts as covenant between God and his people, and it was put on everyone, and from that point forward, that person belonged to God. Now remember that Jesus was born to a Jewish family. Jesus was a Jew. He worshiped the God of Abraham, and he was baptized as a follower of Abraham. Now, something we should remember in today's society, there are two religions in the world that still require circumcision for part of their faith: Judaism and also Islam. Muhammad saw himself as Jewish. He required baptism, and even today, to be a Jew or to be a Muslim, you have to be circumcised. The first century church was also Jewish, but by the time of St. Paul in the second century church, they had started looking at the kosher laws and circumcision as representatives. So in the Christian church, we see not circumcision, but baptism that is prescribed, and it's alluded to in Paul's proclamation to the Roman church. This morning, though, in reading these passages, and you might want to read them on your own to get an understanding of what we're looking at Luke 2, 21 through 35. There's a couple of very significant points I want to make this morning. First is that when the parents were bringing the child for baptism in the temple, they were amazed and marveled that a prophet came forward named Simeon, and he proclaimed that in this child many will rise up and many will fall. And they were amazed. Now, the Greek word for amazed is thaumazo, and it means bewilderment in a positive manner, marveling and just amazed at the possibilities. And it strikes me that we lack too little of that today. In that day and time in the temple, as this was going on, and this family was struck with this prophecy and this amazement of God's providence for them, there were other people in the temple the same day, walking around doing business as usual. And I wonder how many times in our lives God is active in human history, and yet so many of us just walk by as if it's another day. I would challenge us to seek in our lives the amazement, the wonderment, the miraculous things God is doing, the light he is shining even in the darkness of the world. The second thing I'm going to touch on is more specifically the prophecy that Simeon offered this child of destiny, this child named Jesus, who was the anointed Messiah of the living God of Abraham. And that is that in this child, many will fall and many will rise up. A couple of different ways to look at that. One is that through Jesus, some will be condemned and some will be saved. Some will be put down, some will be lifted up. And that is not without scriptural precedent. For indeed we believe the Son of Man is coming, he'll separate the sheep from the goats. But here's the problem with us focusing on that part of the prophecy. We tend to do so focusing on ourselves being lifted up and those we disagree with being put down. So we tend to align the salvation eternal with what we do and put down those who are different. So it falls too quickly into our bias of judgment to think that this is only meant for the rising up of some and the putting down of others. I think a more relevant portion of this for us is to realize that each of us are at times raised up and at times pushed down. Well, if you remember the ministry of Jesus, Jesus came to minister to prostitutes, to socially rejected tax collectors, to the lepers, to the lame, to the lost sheep. And to those who were down, he reached forward and gave them a hand up. And to those who were up, the people of privilege, the people with wealth, he put down. It was the classic case of Jesus came to comfort the afflicted and yet to afflict the comfortable. So in our lives, I think the best way to look at this passage is that there'll be times when we're down and lowly that we will be lifted up in God. And there are other times when we start being prideful and arrogant and seeking our own self-ends that God will, through His Spirit, push us down. And that is part of the journey of faith, is to be lifted up when we're down, to be humbled when we're proud. I'll close by reminding you that walking, the simple act of walking, which we take for granted, most of us, but as you know from the first 2 or 3 years of life, it's a challenge for kids to learn. But walking is technically a controlled fall. As we start to step forward and fall, we put out one leg and stop ourselves and go forward. And as we walk in faith, we need to realize that we're constantly subject to falling. When we fall, God is there to lift us up. And when we start walking too comfortably, as if we're all deserving of all the blessings we share, then God has a way of bringing us down. So in our humility and arrogance, we'll be brought down. In our humbleness and humility and sorrow, we'll be lifted up. I'll close by reminding you of something of the Chinese philosopher Confucius said. Our greatest glory is not in never falling. It is in rising up each time we stumble and fall. God bless you. I hope you can make it to church today.